Welcome back to The Explainer. We're all about taking big, complex topics and breaking them down into simple visual guides.
So, today, we're jumping into a really fascinating question. We're looking at the harvest laws of ancient Israel, a pretty incredible economic system that managed to weave social support right into the fabric of the agricultural year itself. You know, the whole thing really hinged on two core laws, and these laws kicked in before a single grain of wheat even made it back to the barn. They split every single harvest into three different streams: one for the farmer, one for social welfare, and one for religious dedication.
Okay, so let's follow the journey of that harvest. It all starts with the gross harvest. That's literally everything you pull from the field. Right off the top, the first cut is taken out for the leftovers. Think of it like a social tax. What's left over is the net harvest, which is what the farmer actually gets to take home. But even then, there's one more step. A final 10% tithe is separated out from that. So let's dig into that first division, the leftovers. This is such a unique idea because it builds social support directly into the very act of farming. Now, this wasn't about being sloppy or inefficient. Nope. This was a mandated harvest tax. Farmers were actually commanded not to be perfectly efficient. The corners of their fields, a bundle of grain they might have forgotten, or any fruit that fell to the ground, all of that was supposed to be left behind on purpose. And the law was super specific about who this was for. It was designated for the most vulnerable people in that society, folks who, in an economy totally based on land, had no other way to support themselves. It was a really dignified system, right? It allowed them to go and gather food for themselves, directly from the source. And this quote just brilliantly lays out the why behind it all. It wasn't just simple charity. It was an act of national memory, of empathy. The law grounds this whole economic practice in their own history of being powerless. It's basically saying, you need to care for others because you, of all people, know what it's like to have nothing. All right, so that's the leftovers. Now let's go back to the net harvest. That's the part the farmer actually took home. This is where that second big principle comes into play, the tithe. A tithe? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like, a tenth, 10%. 10% of the grain, the fruit, even the livestock that a farmer produced was set apart from the rest of their personal harvest. So the core idea here was that this portion didn't really belong to the farmer in the first place. It was considered God's property. But how this holy portion was actually used is where the system gets really clever, and you start to see its economic genius. See, the distribution of this tithe wasn't the same every year. It actually operated on this fascinating 3-year cycle that managed to balance personal celebration with community responsibility. This cycle shows how the tithe had two totally different jobs. For 2 years, it was all about funding a big festival. But in that third year, it completely transformed into a social safety net. Let's break that down a bit more. So, in years 1 and 2 of the cycle, the farmer would take their 10% tithe, travel to the central place of worship, and basically use it to throw a big celebratory feast for their family. It turned what could have been a dry religious duty into a time of real joy and community. But then, boom, year 3 hits and everything changes. Instead of being eaten by the farmer's family, that same 10% was taken to storehouses right in the farmer's own town. It became, in effect, a decentralized public food bank, making sure there was food for anyone in the local community who needed it. So, the big question is, who exactly got to benefit from that third-year tithe? I mean, it wasn't just a free-for-all. It was a really structured distribution system.
First in line were the Levites. They were members of the priestly tribe. And what made them unique is that they weren't given any land of their own to farm. So with their jobs being full-time at the temple, this tithe was basically their income. It's how they survived. But wait, it doesn't even stop there. In this really amazing cascade effect, the Levites themselves were required to pay a tithe from the tithe they received. This created another crucial layer of support. And this tithe of the tithe, as it's sometimes called, was seen as the absolute holiest portion. It went from the Levites straight to the priests, who were performing the most sacred services at the temple. It made sure that those at the very heart of the religious system were taken care of. And you can see in the text just how vital this whole third-year system was. This line from Malachi really frames it as a national duty, directly tying the people's obedience and bringing that full tithe to the storehouse with their own prosperity and blessing. So when you map it all out like this, you can really see how elegant the whole system was. The harvest first provides for the poor with the leftovers. Then that tithe kicks in. Over 3 years, about 2/3 of it actually goes right back to the farmer for those big celebratory feasts. The other third, gathered up in that critical third year, supports the landless Levites, the priests, and, once again, the community's most vulnerable.
I mean, just think about it for a second. This was a system that handled social welfare, religious funding, and national celebration, all without a central government or a tax agency. It was all built on personal responsibility and local distribution. It really leaves us with a pretty powerful question, right? In our complex modern world, what can we learn from an economy that literally embedded generosity and community support into the act of production itself?